All right, hi everyone. Nice big audience today. So I think that James has introduced everything pretty nicely, and I probably don't have to say too much more. If anyone has any queries or ideas that have popped out after listening to this presentation, please feel free to approach me afterwards, or just get in contact with LifeTec, and we can always try and find you solutions to suit your needs. Okay. So, as we were saying, gardening is a thing that we do for many reasons. I think that Jerry earlier was showing you some many reasons to garden from an ethical point of view, but also from a personal point of view in terms of mental health, physical health, being the breadwinner, lots and lots of reasons, even just to make your house feel a bit more pretty and nice. And there are lots of different ways we can garden. If we have a backyard, we can go all out. If you have a high-rise balcony, you can still plant a few trees. If you have just a bit of a little veggie patch or just a little tiny plant on the side of your window. Lots and lots of different ways to garden. I'm not going to tell you how to garden today. I think there's a bit of an experience gap here in terms of gardening experience, but I am going to try and give you some ideas on ways to make things a little bit easier and a little bit safer. So as I was saying, lots of people garden, but there are some things, some risks and some disabilities that mean that people can no longer do the things that they enjoy doing in terms of gardening. So some of the risks involve, skin injury, musculoskeletal injury, so things like your back, your shoulders, falling in the garden, you hear that a lot, having not enough water, being out in the sun for too long, overexertion. Obviously there's more than this, of course. You've got sunburn, all these sorts of things, but I won't go into all of those. And then you've got the difficulties that aren't related to the specific gardening task, but they can affect how easy it is to do. So things like unsteady balance, or a movement problem, or having reduced strength, or increased pain, reduced energy, reduced vision if you can't see the bee that's about to sting you. So I'll just go through a little bit about these and see what we can go through. So in terms of managing risks, obviously the first thing we want to do is to try and eliminate those risks. So obviously choose plants that don't have poisonous parts if you're going to let the dog run around and eat them. Choose plants without thorns if you're going to brush up against them. More importantly, design paths and plantings so that there are no trip hazards. This is really important when you're getting someone with a walker or rollator coming through, or even just branches that can catch onto your skin or clothing. And the other thing is that we don't really have to do every single gardening task either. If there's something you enjoy doing, then of course, by all means, do it. If it's just difficult and a chore, then maybe you can get someone else to do it or set up some automation system so it's done automatically. So the first thing, obviously, we can talk about is skin protection. So obviously, we've got gardening gloves, long-sleeved shirts. We've also got things like those skin protector sleeves in the bottom left. They can help, particularly for very fragile skin, even if it just has a bit of a drag along a branch that can already get cut, so they can be really useful. Apart from that, also in terms of ergonomics and reducing the risk of musculoskeletal injuries to your neck or your shoulders or your back. So the idea is to avoid bending and stooping, to make sure that you reach between your shoulder and your hips. So if you're bending really low, that's going to be causing a lot of strain to your back. And we're all strongest close to our body, so the further we lean out, the less strength we have, the easier it is to do risks. So the idea is to reduce the height of things that are above your shoulders, increase the height of things that are below our waist, and use reaches or long-handled tools for things that are unable to be put in between those sections. So ideally, we don't really want to be kneeling on the ground. If we can get maybe a stool and a long-handled reacher, that might be perfect, perching down and able to use it that way. So another way of doing it is to raise the garden up to you. So one very, very common way of doing this is by using raised beds. So this is a lovely planting of chives, just in a very simple raised bed setup. I would say that if I was gardening and building this from scratch, I would make that the little surrounding area a little bit wider so we can actually perch on the edge as well, make it a bit easier to sit down. Raised beds are also really useful for sitting down. So whether it's on a walker seat or a wheelchair or just a seat that you bring out to do your gardening. That means that you can actually reach in, use a few tools, not have to reach too high or too low again. It's nice and safe for our backs. You've even got things like table planters, which mean that people can get up really nice and close, particularly if they're quite low down in a wheelchair or on a seat. You've got that extra kick space for your feet. Doesn't have to all be tables and raised gardens though. Some things like standard plants, you're also still raising that up, but it's still looking quite nice and maybe like a mini tree. And you've also got your different trellises and espalier techniques to also raise it up. So obviously, as it's growing from the bottom, you still have to do a little bit of movement from the bottom of the tree or the trellis, but as it grows, it's a lot easier for you to manage. Vertical gardens are another really interesting way of doing things. They're getting a little bit more trendy these days. You can see on the right-hand side there's a commercially available system just for indoors now, and someone on the left-hand side has made their own system up with some plastic pots and things for their strawberries. A lot of these systems can also be set up for self-watering as well. And of course, if we're trying to make things a little bit easier and portable, then we can also use potted plants. So we can get them raised up and perched on the side of our balcony, or we can get them up next to the window. Then we're not reaching down too low. We're also getting a little bit of trendy terrariums coming in these days. So they're just little gardens that can also, if you use a closed system, so it's all closed and they don't need much water, if any at all. So you can build them and have them sitting indoors somewhere nice and they'll take care of themselves. And lastly, we were also talking about long-handled tools. So for things that you can't get close to you, it's nice to use the tools to do it for you. So we've got these sorts of long-handled fruit pruners, but you've also got some special kind of shears and special shovels and all sorts of things that you can get as well. Apart from your back, also thinking about wrists and fingers. Now, OTs like me are always talking about wrists and fingers because we do so many things with our hands. So the idea for being safe and making sure that we don't get any wrist problems down the track, or reduce our likelihood at least, is to make sure that we have a neutral wrist posture, so we're not bending too far on either side, reducing those repetitive movements, reducing the strength needed to hold things, and to reduce obviously the amount of carrying that we have to do as well, because that's using that strength for gripping. So there are lots of ways that can be managed. One way is to use really lightweight tools, then they're less heavy to carry around. This guy has also got a nice little carry setup, so he doesn't actually have to carry them in his hands. He's got them on his body, on his hips, which are a stronger part of our body. The central picture shows some power tools. So we've got a powered wheelbarrow here. So that can be really useful if you're going over some harder terrain, for instance, or just maybe if it's just a little bit hard to just push that wheelbarrow, filled it up a bit too far. And then on the right, and maybe you've seen these things when you came to the LifeTec stall earlier, but we've also got handle attachments that can fit onto a normal broom or a normal shovel, something like that. Just helps you to get that extra handle, means that you don't have to bend so much as previous, but it also means that you can maintain that neutral wrist posture rather than bending your wrist to do those activities. Lastly, obviously, these sound like common sense things, but when we actually think about them, sometimes we don't do them. Reducing the distance that we have to carry things. So placing things near where they're needed. So if there's a tool, maybe a long-handled reacher that you only use for one tree, maybe storing it near the tree. Having a wheeled pot plant stand, or maybe using a wheelbarrow, as we were saying, to move things from place to place. You've also got some really nice trolleys that can attach to scooters and wheelchairs and all sorts of things these days as well. And we were talking about tool belts before. We also need to talk about energy maintenance, because gardening is a lot of work sometimes. And that can be fun, but it also means that we're also using our energy, and sometimes that means that we have to prioritise what we need to do. So the first thing's obviously take your time. You don't have to do everything all at once. You can spread it out throughout the day, or take a seat, have a bit of a drink of water, keep going. As I was saying before, prioritise the enjoyable. If you enjoy weeding, go ahead, weed as much as you like. If you hate it, maybe that's something that you can get a special service to do, which you can. Maybe the same with pruning. Pruning can be really hard to get to all those plants, and it doesn't have to happen every day, so that could be something that can be, you can get a grandson to do, or a son, or a service. And then the other thing was to do, to automate routine tasks. So watering can be done automatically these days. Lighting can also be done automatically if we're talking indoor plants. We also need to talk about where the garden setting is, and if it's a big setting, then you probably need to have a seat or something to sit down on. I need one. The other thing we can think about to reduce the maintenance is no-dig gardens. So that's a layering technique. I'm sure many of you have heard of it already, where the soil gradually breaks down and you just add layers to the top. What that means is that you don't have to dig much at all. You just kind of add layers on top. You've got the plants in there and they do quite nicely. When we're talking watering, that is a thing that we do daily, every second day, depending on your plants. First thing, as Jerry was saying before, is the concept of xeriscaping, which is making sure that plants are designed for the conditions that they live in. So if you're in a really drought-prone area, drought-tolerant plants will reduce your watering. Irrigation systems, watering systems, there are so many out there these days. Lots of people like your drip irrigation systems if you're trying to save water as well, but there's also automated sprinkler systems, all sorts of things. Then we've got moisture meters as well to try and tell people if they're having trouble finding out when the soil is needing to be watered. It can actually indicate, okay, the soil is dry. So this is just an example of a watering system that someone set up. So this is kind of like a water-fed system underneath the plants, kind of brings it all through the roots from the bottom. Now we're talking about automation. Now automation is getting a little bit more well known these days, I guess, but not everyone knows that you can or how easy it could be to do. So it's quite simple. You've got a sensor, so maybe that could be a timer. It goes off at a certain time, and then it sends a signal to a controller to say, okay, it's time to water something. You've got plant sensors that can also do this. So these can say, okay, my soil is too dry now, turn the water on. Or it can send you a reminder to do that yourself if you're having some problems remembering. Weather sensors, same sort of thing. It says, okay, is it going to rain today? No need to water, it's fine. You're going to have rain. We're talking about watering controllers, they do the same sort of thing. And then the last one is kind of a bit more out there. We've got robot lawnmowers as well. So I think I have a picture of that on the next slide. Yep, there we go. These are pretty fun. They just kind of wander around your lawn every day. You don't have to do any lawn mowing. You just set up the boundaries and they won't go outside those boundaries. So they can be particularly useful for people with large properties or Alternatively, for people with those really funny corners and things that it's just really hard to get the mower to, these little things are a little bit smaller and they do it every day rather than once every couple of weeks. So this is electric. It gets recharged. It goes back to its little charging station every day and it charges itself up. It's like a husband, she says. No, you don't have to feed it. It feeds itself with electricity. You do have to empty the little lawnmower thing if it doesn't already put it out on the ground. Alrighty, so we've talked about trying to keep safe and try and reduce the risk of difficulties. Now we'll talk a little bit about adapting for difficulties as well. So one really common one that I've tried to show there is arthritis in terms of grip, and we'll go through that in a minute, but let's first talk about mobility. So obviously, depending on how tired we all are, we all have times when we're not the most coordinated of people. But as we get older, we all have the chance to get reduced mobility. So whether this means that we need some sort of walking frame or a wheelchair, that's fine. Most gardens make that really hard to do things from though, so we have to plan ahead to see, okay, maybe I do need a walker in the future, how can I still make sure that I can get to the back of the garden and not fall over? So that I've put the roller skates in there for a reason. Basically, what I like to say is those little tiny caster wheels on walkers and on wheelchairs, they're pretty much going to be at least the size of roller skate wheels, if not larger. So I like to think, where can someone with roller skates go? If they can't go to the back of the garden, maybe I shouldn't be taking my walker down there. Unless I've got some really giant wheels, really big ones. So the other thing, the top left picture was just showing you that, yeah, okay, the grass may look flat, but there's still a lot of rocks and stuff in there if it's not, there could be anyway. And the right-hand side kind of tries to show that you can actually make a path that goes throughout the place. You can still access it from either side. You can still access those garden beds. I would probably make that a little bit wider, to be honest. It looks like that door might be a little bit small to get through, but we're all limited in our space, so. Yeah. Then the other thing we can do if we have trouble with moving about is to use some sort of mobility device that gives us power. So the first thing that people often think about is lawnmowers, ride-on lawnmowers, and they can be really great if you can get into them. So sometimes they're just a little bit too tall, a little bit too big. That's where your wheelchairs can be really useful. Scooters are all right as well. They tend to have a bit of a larger turning circle though. So in those narrow kind of garden paths, they can be a little bit harder to navigate. The other thing is that you can actually have on power chairs a lot of different features that you can't have on scooters. So for instance, in the bottom left here, you've got a chair that elevates so you can actually reach a little bit higher. On the right-hand side as well, we've got an all-terrain chair. So that can go in mud and puddles, all sorts of things. You can do all sorts of gardening in that. Extreme gardening. Okay, so any questions so far? It looks like everyone's happy. Cool. All right, so we'll just start talking about grasp as well. So maybe some of you saw the tap turners we were talking about at LifeTec before. So they can help to open the hose tap, for instance. That can be really sticky. You've also got things like built-up padded handles. You can attach those handles or you can build them up with some extra foam. Make it a lot easier to grip just because that's a bit open. You've got things called hose holders. They're interesting things. Basically, you just kind of put the hose in them, and you take them and you stake them in the ground, and you can kind of just turn them from one side to the other. So you don't have to hold it there for the period of time. You can just kind of leave it there for a bit. And then we've also got lots and lots of types of splints, cuffs and grips as well that can try and help you to, if you don't have any actual grip at all, you can still actually wrap that around and wrap it to your hand so that you can actually still hold it. Alrighty, so that gave you hopefully a little bit of an idea of some things that we can do for gardening. There's way more than I did today, it's just really a bit of a taster. Yeah, great. Feel free to give us a call at LifeTec anytime that you want, or email us, or our website has a lot of details as well. Wonderful.